So here's your daily dose. I saw an interesting post on online where someone posed a question and asked, "When would you know you got to the point where you needed to get yourself in therapy?" And I had to think about it. And for me, it was I'd been talking to a friend about it for years, right? Like we talked about therapy, and I was like, I think I might need therapy for myself, right? So I was like, I think I'm going a little crazy. I think I'm a little for various reasons. I was saying, I think I want to get myself into therapy, and this was prior to the pandemic. So life was lifing, and the pandemic happened, and there were some things that occurred when COVID happened and I caught COVID in the beginning. That was really tough for various reasons. And so I had decided after I had recovered that I was just going to live life. I was going to live life to the fullest extent. I wasn't going to allow fear to hold me back. And so that's what I did. I started to um, explore my adventurous side that I had put to bed many years ago. Um, yeah, there were things that I did, and I'm not saying that all of them were wise decisions because they weren't. But for the most part, I decided to live my life at that point. And I got to a point where I felt like I wasn't living life anymore. Not necessarily not living life anymore, but I was like, damn, something's just not right. And at that time, my marriage was failing. I saw my marriage as failing. My partner did not see the marriage as failing. And so I was like, something's got to give. And I recall something had happened that earlier on that in the week, and it was a friend's birthday at the end of the week, and we had planned to take a trip to DC for the weekend, which ended up being an amazing time, right? And it was when I met up. We met up with my cousin. We had lunch with her, and after which she dropped us off at the airport. And when I got to the airport, I just felt this wave of defeat come over me out of nowhere. And I didn't understand it. Um, I was like, damn. And let me go back. I understood it to an extent, right? I knew I wanted to go home because I really missed my daughter. But I didn't want to go home because at the time I did not want to see my partner. And like I said, it was just a wave of defeat. I had never felt that before. Um, it was literally like right when I stepped foot into the airport, and I sat there and I was just sad the entire time. And when I landed, my partner at the time, ex-husband, had picked me up from the airport, and that's when he's sharing this bad news, right, about something at home. And that confirmed the feeling that I was feeling in the airport that I couldn't put my finger on, where there was that sense of defeat I felt. And that news that was given was like something that was a major expense. I just come off a trip, you know, and also it was something that was supposed to be taken care of and that they had said they were going to take care of, but another story for another day. And so I recall that I'm coming off the flight. I can't do what I need to do. And now there's this large expense that now we need to pay to have done. And I don't even think it was the money. It was more so the fact of you're doing nothing about it, right? You're waiting on me to come back to handle it. And that really kind of annoyed me, but that was what it was. And I just recall the mood that entire night, just like I was done. And so I had the day off the next day, and I woke up that morning and, did my usual routine in the morning. And I hadn't even left the house yet. And I was going to go drop my daughter off at school. And my ex husband, then husband, had texted me and just simply asked, "Are we going to be okay?" And my response was no. My response was no. I couldn't lie. I didn't have it in me to try and sugarcoat how I felt or hide how I felt. It was just a straight up no. And my response after that was, you need to get yourself in therapy. And of course, that was an argument back and forth. Why do I need to? You don't need to. And whatever. I didn't even get into it, but let's just say I didn't share it with him that I was going to get myself in therapy. But by that Saturday, I had my first therapy session. I literally hopped on. Someone had told me about Psychology Today. That same day I told him that, I hopped on Psychology Today, found myself a therapist. What was so funny was that they had asked me, I called the practice and they asked me, do you prefer a therapist of color or not? And I said, well, yeah, just because, like, for me, that's important, especially uh, someone who specializes in understanding Caribbean uprising. Like, let's be real. Uh, that's a different beast. And so they got me an appointment, and it was supposed to be the following week. And that Friday, I had a friend of mine had came over, and I said to her, I said, I can't wait for this therapy to start. Like, I wish it could start tomorrow. Suddenly, I get a call from the practice, and they're like, "Hey, we actually just hired a new therapist, but their availability, which is virtual, is only on Saturdays, and is the woman of color. Do you want to just switch to this person? You can have a session as soon as tomorrow." And the joy that came over me, I'm like, yeah, yeah. And so by then, I started my first therapy session. I continued on, and still continuing right now, but I'm in a very good place mentally. It's crazy because I'm to a point where I can actually almost stop therapy, according to my therapist. We had a conversation recently where she's like, the person you were when you first came in to these sessions is totally different from the person you are now. And she's like, the leaps and bounds you've taken are amazing. And so it's crazy how I talked about going to therapy for years, but it was that thing that pushed me. Sometimes we're looking for a sign. And with that sign, we're like, all right, now it's time to move. When it's a big, big sign. But sometimes the small signs are there. And what I've learned is to trust myself. Trust myself when I have that feeling of, you know, I need to get some help or something's not right. And ever since going into therapy, I have had that ability to be like, something's not right, and usually be able to find a way to mitigate the damage that's going to happen when it comes to something bad. Now, that doesn't mean that I still don't have fear sometimes that there are things that are going to come up, and I can't I'm not a perfect person, and there's no way I can sit here and say, yeah, I can handle every little thing that's thrown my way. What I have learned to do is cope. I've learned to say, all right, that ain't got nothing to do with me. Let me move forward. I've learned to compartmentalize certain things. I've also learned to tell people no very quickly. If it doesn't suit me, I don't entertain it. I think that it's taught me to do what's best for me. A lot of times in therapy in the beginning, um, I'm thinking about this now. She didn't mention this. She had mentioned it at the time, but she didn't mention it recently. But I had this tendency to think about others because I'm like, well, I can do this for myself, but how's it going to affect everybody else? And when I say everybody else, I'm not talking about my kid. That's different. I'm talking about, you know, anyone else that's close to me. And she made a point and said, well, that person's going to be okay. This is where they're at. This is where their situation's at. But this is where you're at. This is where your situation is. You need to focus on yourself and make sure you and your daughter are good. And that has taught me, make sure me and my daughter are good. And so I've come a long way. And that was the point where I knew I needed to get myself in therapy. And my advice to people, always trust your gut feeling. If your gut is telling you something isn't right, something might be right. Learn to trust that, because you don't want to seem like you're crazy, but what you'll realize later on is, damn, I had that feeling for a reason. Whether it's about a person, a thing, a decision you're about to make. If you say that, you were going to go out, because this happens to me. Like, there are times I make plans to go out, and then I'm like, I'm not feeling it. Like, something's telling me not to go. And usually that confirmation comes later as to why I felt that feeling of why I shouldn't have went. So always just trust your gut feeling in any situation. But yeah, that was my point where I knew I needed to go to therapy. So there goes your direct dose.